Today guys, we're gonna make a wedding sign for my cousin. Alright guys, so it is 2024 now. It's a brand new year. Our goal for this year is to hit 100,000 subscribers. If you like what we're doing, do us a solid guys, hit that subscribe button. We're putting out a bunch of videos and we got some big plans for this year, so help us out. So my cousin Bailey's just got married to her husband Joel, who's a super nice guy. So a little tip guys, for every wedding you go to, bring him a sign. That's always gonna lead to more business. Well, I say always, but generally speaking, that leads to more business. So put your name on the back and make sure that people know who made that. And that way when they ask the bride and groom like, dude, that's an awesome sign, who made that? They'll be like, that dude. So, if you want more business, make signs for wedding gifts. And I'll be sure to put links in the description below for everything we used, including other videos that you can reference for different parts of this. For this sign, we made an 18 by 18 inch redwood board. Now, we've been having a couple of camera issues lately, so unfortunately we didn't record that. However, at the end of the video, I will put links to 2 different videos that you can go to check out how we make our board, and then also a full video on what I'm doing here, which is the inkjet transfer process. One of the most difficult parts about doing a process like this to get your lines and your image on the board is the basic measuring, making sure that once you transfer it, that everything's exactly how you want it. Now we made this board a little bit bigger just in case it was off a touch, then we'd be able to kind of trim it up. But you want to make sure that you make marks while the transfer is facing up. That way when you turn it over, you make sure everything's right where it needs to be. The first bit we use is our profile bit. Now normally we start off between 3/16 and 1/4 of an inch deep, but you can see this heart right here is some really thin lines. So I decided to start at 1/8 of an inch deep. Another reason for that is this redwood has a tendency to have kind of hard grain and then soft grain. So it's really difficult to keep a straight line. When you start out a little bit shallower, say like I'm doing here, 1/8 of an inch deep, it makes it a bit easier to get your initial line as straight as possible. And then you can always come back and carve deeper to make sure that your depth is where you really want it to be. One thing that new carvers generally do is they carve too shallow. So a lot of people actually do most of their carving with maybe around 1/8 of an inch deep, which is what I did for the longest time, till Dad finally got me to start carving deeper. When you carve deeper, it gives the sign a much better look in our opinion. It really does help to give more depth to the sign. Now, there's a caveat to that. The areas where the letters are really close together, you don't want to cut off any of the letters, one side or the other. And there's a few different ways you can do that. One way is you can manually adjust the depth of the router and just do the thin areas, but how we generally do it is once we get to a thin area in our carving, we just use our hands and we lift the router off of the sign a little bit, just enough to where we're not hitting things that we don't want to hit. Something I should point out here guys is the fact that I'm showing mainly the initial part of the carving. There's a lot of areas on this sign, especially because of that hard and soft grain, where I'll go back and I'll just kind of feather in the lines a little bit. So if I have a bobble, I'll go back and take my time and straighten it out. I don't show too much of that on the video just because this took me right around 45 minutes to carve from start to finish, and we don't want, a 3-hour video. So just keep in mind that even though what you're seeing on the video here is like I'm just going through one pass, there's a lot of areas where I had to go back and feather out and straighten up lines. So now that I have my initial carving done, all of the outline is done and the artwork. So that's all done at 1/8 of an inch deep like we talked about. Now I'm going to drop my profile bit down to 1/4 inch deep, and I'm going to go around everything again. Now, this seems like it takes a lot of time, but this particular step really only took about, I don't know, maybe 5 to 6 minutes just for this, simply because all my initial line's done. All I got to do is kind of follow the groove that's already there. You just want to be careful that you carve to the outside instead of carving away more of the lettering that you want to stand out. Now that the profile work is done, I'm going to go in with our 90 degree and do all the background in the cloud. Now, it shows that I went about 3/16 of an inch deep, but it's actually between 3/16 and 1/4. Basically, I want to take the bit as deep as it'll go without going past the flutes. The flutes are essentially the cutting edge of your bit, and if you drop that bit deeper into the board than the flutes will cut, then you're going to get some really bad burning, and it'll be almost impossible to hold a line. One thing that happens on a regular basis, especially with me, is if I'm doing an outset lettering or outset anything, I'll make the cloud first, and if I don't go in and make sure I get all of my middle areas, like say the middle of the J or the middle of the B, then I tend to forget them. And then if I sand it off, spray it and sand it off, I have to go back and redo it. So a good idea is once you get your cloud made around your letters, go in each letter that has a middle, whether it's a B or a P or whatever. And make sure you get all of the middles done first and then do everything outside around it, because it's super easy to overlook that. To do the cutout corners is actually pretty simple. All you got to do is measure out an even space from each corner on both sides. So I chose 2 inches, and I did this on all 4 corners. Then take something round and connect those lines. That gives you a nice symmetrical look on each corner. You remember those camera issues I was telling you about? Yeah. We didn't record cutting these out with a bandsaw, but that's what we used to cut these corners. I just made a couple of relief cuts and then used the bandsaw to cut it out, and then the spindle sander to make sure it's nice and smooth. Once those corners were done, then we took our 45-degree chamfer bit on the new Hercules router, which, by the way, is pretty stinking good, and we put as deep a chamfer on this thing as we possibly could. Once all the carving and sanding was done, we put it on our little Lazy Susan and used our primer to spray everything black. Now, something to remember, especially with thin lines like that heart right there, get it from multiple angles because it's really easy to miss spots when you're spraying. Once it was dry, which only took a few minutes, then we used our 80 grit disc on the disc sander to get the majority of the black off. Then we gave it a finish sand with the random orbital and a 120 grit disc. One thing to be careful is keep these discs as flat as possible so you don't lean it and nick the black, because then you have a lot of touch up to do. Again, for the editing purpose, we only show the first coat of clear, but we actually put about 6 or 8 coats on this thing. We like a nice glassy finish.
So there it is, guys. Now this redwood, I love the way it looks, especially when it has a clear coat on it, but man, it can get real grainy. Some of those lines were real hard to do, and I had to go back and feather them in, because when you hit that hard and soft grain, it gets tough to hold a line. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will leave links in the description for all the stuff we used today. You can always shoot me an email if you have any questions, Ryan@makeawoodsign.com, and we'll see you guys on the next one.